Well, it's rjmendera here, and I wanted to add to my collection of stories, which I have posted on YouTube. Over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I guess, there's been some different ones about my taxi experience in the north of Canada. But today I wanted to tell you about a man who was my first boss. His name was Derek Pollard. He was the father of 3 sons, Mark, Joel, and Sean. And he also had 3 adoptive sons. His wife's name was Marge, who was studying Russian at the time. And they lived in a little farm which was across the lake by Balfour, which is close to Nelson. And to get to the farm, you had to take this ferry, which, started over here. It was on a cable. You drive the car on. It was a small ferry. Couldn't hold many cars. And it wouldn't take very long until it would get across to the other side. And that's how we went to work in the morning as well. Pollard had a small delivery business called Snappy Service. Now this was in 1972. Later, in about 1981, after I'd finished university, I started my own Snappy Service, but this was in a different city. This was in Kelowna. So anyway, he had, I think, 3 little kind of these Datsun pickup trucks, these smaller ones with kind of a plywood deck on the back, which was fixed up so that he could deliver groceries. He would deliver groceries for Safeway, and I think it was Super Value, and some places around town for older folks who didn't have a car. Or Nelson is quite a steep city in the sense that the streets are, they're quite steep and go up the hill, and so it's difficult if you're older and want to get your groceries home. So that's what Pollard had set up, as well as he also did small move jobs, and he delivered appliances around town. The way I met Pollard was actually very coincidental. Cheers. My stepfather, Otto Samite, was a riding instructor, and he had courses set up at that time in 1972 in the summer at the Greater Ranch, which is now a winery. It's vineyard all over the place, what used to be orchard. He was giving lessons then, and anyway, one day this kid, I was about 12, blonde-haired kid, came galloping down the road and asked if this was the right place for the riding lessons. And yes, of course it was. And that was Sean Pollard. Well, anyway, the boys, I think it was Mark, the oldest boy, who was really into taking riding lessons at the time. They were there, I think, for a week or maybe 10 days, and took lessons from Otto. So that's what I recall. Now, Sean and I got along hand in glove right away. I don't really know why. It's just a thing, some people you just automatically click with, and Sean was a little spunky little kid. I loved him right away. I thought, hey, this is great. And we had like a D2 Cat, which we used to clear the road, which is quite steep up to the main highway, 97. And so anyway, I let him drive that. I basically sitting with him on it, right? Let him steer it. It's kind of like left, right. It's not very hard to steer, but it's a little bit dangerous. You got to watch out what you're doing. And at that time, I also discovered that my little brother, the legend, that's a different story. He's grown up now. But at that time, I found that this made him very jealous, because apparently I'd never let him do that before with me. Or maybe it was just a thing that suddenly there was this kid and I was paying attention to that kid more than to him. In any case, the amazing thing that happened that year, my final year of high school, grade 12, was that Sean Pollard invited me to come and work with his dad in his delivery business because they were looking for another man. And so I thought about that and I thought, well, okay, maybe, because I didn't really have anything concrete planned after my graduation. And I contemplated this for a few days. And I did actually jump into the back of the pickup with these boys one day, take the things that I needed, a few clothes and stuff, and charge off to Nelson. It's quite a drive, by the way. And so that was my first job, was working for Sean's dad, Derek, whom everyone in Nelson knew as the Beard, because he had a nice round, kind of Santa Claus type beard, fluffy kind of thing. So basically, I went and I lived with the family. We boarded in a small room upstairs. And Sean and I slept in the same bed upstairs. There were also three boys like kind of bunking down in another room up there. And I have some amazing memories just of that farm, of haying with their uncle in the summertime, of getting up in the morning and changing their sprinkler lines and walking barefoot through the dew and stuff like that, and listening to Neil Diamond records late at night when we fell asleep. And then in the morning, the same routine. We charge off to the ferry, catch it, and do our day's work. But it didn't really seem like work at that time. I was just barely 19. It just seemed like an adventure, like, this is an adventure. This isn't work. This is fun. But I wanted to tell you about Derek Pollard. Well, he was a big, sensitive man. He was a kind man, I think. And he had, for example, a big old Indian motorbike, which was just kind of standing there in the shed, amongst other things, antiques. Well, it's worth quite a bit of money. Two incidents that stuck out, which showed you what type of a man Derek Pollard was. For example, it came to the day when one of the cows, he had I think 3 or 4 cows on a pasture there. Well, one of them had to be shot, for meat, basically. They needed meat that summer, or was it fall? I don't remember. And Pollard was not the kind of man who enjoyed doing this, and it was like, you could see him, he had the rifle there, and you could see him go into this kind of trance thing. It was like, well, it was like kind of like Indian thing where they basically apologized to the spirit of the animal for killing it. So I was doing something similar to that, because this cow had grown up on this farm, whatever, and he shot it, and I could see he was really, moved with the whole thing. That was one incident. The other incident was when we were delivering one time in this big truck, I don't know, a 5-ton truck, or 7.5, and he was going down an alley behind Woolworths somewhere, and suddenly this little kid jumped out in front of the truck. I mean, just so dumb, it was just totally unexpected. Pollard hit the brakes and just barely avoided hitting the poor kid. And he just, I looked at him and he just sat there. And he went, brrr, he was just like totally shook up. And he turned to me and he said, like, if I ever hit a kid, I'm just gonna stop doing this, period. And it was a big, kind man. Everyone in Nelson knew Derek Pollard the Beard, because he'd gone in and out. And we would rally at this little service station in the morning, and find out what jobs we had waiting for us. There was a phone there with they answered the phone for him. So Marge would fly around in this big old Lincoln Continental. I really liked that huge car, with these big thick walls. I love Lincoln Continentals, and I later drove one as a taxi. getting on with the story. It's actually not a story that really has a dramatic end to it or anything like that. It's just a portrait of this father and husband and you know and a well-known guy around town. Well, if you are as old as me, you may remember the first ice hockey series, international, which was played against the Russians in 1972. I think it was 72. And, you know, the Russians came over to Canada, and I think they played 4 matches here in various cities. And then the Canadian Stars, all the stars from back then played, went to Russia. And so that was the series. And, well, Pollard basically liked to have a few beer after work. So I think it was the Savoy pub. I don't remember I'm not sure if that was the right one. There were 3 or 4 pubs in town, but he always went to the Savoy, which is a little bit on the downhill side of town. And we had a few drinks there. You know, I sort of had more than 2. You know, less than 5, but more than 2. And we drive home, and he was just like, he was solid. I mean, he found his way home, and I felt confident driving with him. You know, that everything would be fine. He never had any problem. And I think the cops kind of knew this, but they realized he was a businessman and they kind of avoided that. Well, in any case, this was 1972, and this was the year of the series. And anyone that is Canadian or lived at that time knew that Paul Henderson scored the winning goal in Moscow in the final game, and the Canadians won the series. It was one hell of a series. There was all kinds of commotion going on when the Russians came over here. They felt cheated because the Canadians were body checking too hard, you know, stuff like that. And they were threatened to leave. There was like intermissions, and the CBC was going, oh, they might leave, you know. It was dramatic. No one knew what would happen. It could have led to war or something, you know. So, well, this was the final game in Nelson, and we went and sat in this pub, and I just remember, the whole pub was like one entity. It was just all one entity, and it was just at the edge of their seats when things were going on the ice. When Henderson scored, you know, he came around from the back and wham, goal. The pub just went up in the air. I mean, things were flying around. Everybody was embracing each other. I think that's probably the closest I ever got to feeling like a real true Canadian. Of course, I'm German born, but mostly raised in Canada, so I have 2 spirits. And, well, that's the best side of my Canadian spirit, let's say. So that was the ice hockey thing, and yeah, well, we had a lot of really good things going on there in the summertime. Kootenay Lake. Mark would take us up with a little motorboat, and we'd go visit some, I don't know, little areas where you can have some pop or something. And what else happened at that time? Yeah, they had these little trail bikes, so we drive up through the woods and visit a glacier, stuff like that. That was really cool stuff. I'd never done anything like that before in my life, so that was like a new experience for me. Well, Marge learning Russian was kind of cool. Marge also gave some kind of gymnastic lessons in Balfour. But then come wintertime, I have to tell you about Dave, the draft dodger. Well, there was this young guy called Dave from the U.S., who at the time, I think it was the Vietnam War. You know, he didn't want any part of that, so he basically had been working for Pollard for a while. I was maybe 25, 26. He liked to light a little pipe in the morning and stuffs a little chocolate type material in there in the morning and puff on it a while. One day he asked me if I would like to also, and I said, well, fine, I'm not into that, but fine. since we get along so good, you know. And the day just went smoothly and everything was wonderful. So anyway, Dave was a really cool guy, and you know, we just delivering groceries and stuff with him was fun. We had this one incident where we were driving the big truck, and it was in winter, and we had to go down this really steep road to deliver to a house here on the side. The road was packed snow, and I said, Dave, don't drive down this way. You know, maybe go around, drive up the other way. And he said, oh, no, we're okay. We got weight on. Well, it's obvious, you know. You start driving down here and put some brakes on, and the thing just started sliding like a big old sleigh. I'm like, uh-oh. But fortunately, we kind of drifted over to the side a little bit, into the ditch, and it got enough traction there to stop. And then we're kind of hanging there in this ditch with the truck loaded. And Dave got out. He didn't want any more of that. You know, it was like draft dodging from the truck, right? And I said, well, geez, now what are we going to do? I thought, well, it's not that bad. You get in and just give gas and get out of the ditch and just go roll slowly down the rest of the hill. And then have to pull some things up the hill. Well, I did. I got the courage to get back in this bloody thing and to drive it down the hill. Problem solved. That's the first time I realized, hey, you know, you're not a chicken shit. But, you know, I was dumb at the time. I'm still pretty stupid. And anyway, there was that time with Dave, which was really cool. And Sean and the boys were also helping at that time. So they had enough manpower. And I think we just had too many mouths to feed on the little farm, so that the Pollards finally decided, well, we have to lay you off. So after, I think it was about a year, I was laid off. I lived, for a time, I moved out of the little farm and lived by a widow in Nelson, which was also a very cool experience. First time in my own little room, and she cooked meals, very good meals. She had a little dog. And that was the winter that, I think it was Billy Paul who played the Me and Mrs. Jones. We got a thing going on. That was my favorite song. That was like around Christmas time that played. I just loved it when that played. And it was a really beautiful atmosphere in Nelson. I love Nelson. It's a really cool town. Pollard eventually packed his business up, and the boys were doing some other kind of transport. The last time I talked to them, which is years ago now, but later, as I say, after college and university, I came back to Kelowna, and I started my own snappy service there. Delivered stuff for 6-7 years before I finally sold it and moved to Germany. Anyway, that's the story of my first ever job. My first ever boss, Derek Pollard, the Beard. Live long and prosper.